Hello, everybody. It's Nairi. Gosh, it's awful when you go live and you see what you really look like. So I'm a bit late actually this week publishing a video. So I thought what I would do was I would go live instead. I thought that would be really nice to do for a change. I did promise people that I would give a lot more warning before I went live, but life gets in the way. So I haven't been able to do that. And I've just grabbed it because both boys are at my mum's tonight, a different night, and I've just got this lovely gap of time of peace and quiet. So I thought I'd get on and do a live. And if people join me, that's amazing. If they don't, then you'll be able to watch this back on the replay and hopefully get some valuable information on early neglect, which is what I'm looking at today as my general topic. I'll see if we can talk about other things. I'm sure we will. But early neglect and how that impacts on adopted children, foster children, that's kind of my subject area. And if you don't know me, my name is Nairi. I have 2 adopted sons. And before that, we were foster carers for about 5 or 6 years. And our boys were our foster children. And then, sorry about my phone beeping, our boys were foster children. And then we adopted them eventually after quite a while. So that is basically who I am and what I do. And I've been running the channel for about 3 years. So sorry about all the beeping, everybody. Let's just turn that down. So what made me think about doing this subject today was actually I've started home educating my eldest son, who is a teenager. We've kept him in mainstream for a long time, and then it came to a crunch where it was his own mental health and the need to take action. And if I'm honest, both my husband and I like our freedom, so it wasn't an easy choice, but we decided to go for it. So we took him out of school, and another thing that I don't mention on my channel very often is that the latest qualification I did was communication disorders. So looking at how people struggle to communicate and why they struggle to communicate. So this fits in really nicely with early neglect and some of the issues that my adopted everything's back back to front when you're looking at the camera, everything that my adopted sons have gone through, because they were without speech when we had them when they were 2 and 3, so they were a long way behind, and they were very neglected. I mean, very neglected. So I'd like to discuss today the impact of that early neglect and how that looks kind of with language development and how common problems with language development is with fostered and adopted children. And I just want to look at neglect in general, kind of what it really looks like, and how it sort of manifests itself both in the past with them and now. So when I think of abuse and neglect, and when I think of abuse or maltreatment, I think of something that is deliberately done to a child. And yes, in a way, a parent might deliberately neglect a child, but a lot of the time with neglect, it's more about what just isn't happening and what the parent isn't prioritizing, and the needs of the child just not being met, rather than it's not always about a parent deliberately neglecting. It could be that that parent has got their own disability, their own health issues. It could be that they have drug or alcohol problems. It could be a number of things as to why they may not be able to prioritize those children in their home, or that child in their home. And so you end up over a period of time, if you're looking at sustained neglect, you end up with a pattern that the child is used to but doesn't know is neglect, and that the family sort of continue with, and the child then doesn't have what they need to function and develop. So often when you're talking about a baby or a young child, then you're talking about failure to thrive. You might have heard that term before, and it's like the child isn't meeting their milestones. They don't look like they're thriving. Often you're talking about physical, because when it comes in terms of sort of categorizing abuse, neglect, normally emotional abuse falls into its own category, but it often overlaps with neglect. So I suppose one thing to say about neglect is it does overlap with so many of the other forms of maltreatment as well. It kind of can be in with the others as well. So when I think about neglect and I think about my boys and what they've gone through, I think about the fact that They may not have been clothed adequately, so they might not have been wearing clothes that covered them adequately, or they might have been ill-fitting, difficult for them to wear. That was very true. I think about the fact that they wouldn't have been fed regularly, and if they were, it wouldn't have necessarily been what you would expect to feed a young child. So, when they come to us, then it was a case of showing them what a regular meal looks like and showing them what types of things they should be eating at that point. Um, with our sons, there was evidence of, shall we say, not being kept safe, sort of bumps and bruises and things, and evidence of not being fed sufficiently because of their weight, and evidence as well of being given the wrong things to eat, so rotten teeth, thin hair, sort of not getting any nutrition. So all that could be there, and warmth, having a safe space to be, being kept, away from particular situations, although that's maybe going into other types of neglect. So, other types of abuse, sorry. So, those are the obvious things that you would think of. And for it to really take effect, it has to be over a sustained period of time. So, you're not necessarily talking about it happening once or twice, although you don't want that to happen. Most parents fail a few times, a few hundred times, and that's fine. We're talking about every day there's not enough food. Every day there's not enough clothing. Every day there's not enough stimulation. So let me take a swig of coffee. Let me just drink this. The more insidious kind of thing, which is not having enough stimulation, which often comes with neglect, is the bit that I think probably really impacts on that early brain development. Of course, other things impact on brain development. If you're not warm enough, you're not fed enough, you don't have enough, then yeah. But I think lack of stimulation. So if the parent is not bothering to meet the needs of the child, is not talking to them, doesn't decide to play with them, then actually those early sort of brain development things are just not going to happen in the way that you would expect with a really young baby. So we have a grandson, and one thing that happens within our family is everybody chatting to that baby and cooing at him, and when he does something right, praising him. And he is quickly learning that if he does certain things, this is what will come back for him. And so that interaction is happening. And one thing I notice with him is when we are talking as a family, so when I'm talking to my daughter or as we're talking as a three together, he will start chirping up and kind of doing his own little conversation in the background. And it's almost like, well, I'm still here and I'm letting you know that I'm still here. And he knows to do that. He knows that if he chats, we'll all go, oh, look, he's making noises, he's doing things. But a child that doesn't get that, there is no need for them to put themselves out to try and communicate or make noises in any way. There's no, shall we say, benefit for them doing that at all. And this is the case with my two sons, especially the eldest one. I'm going to say that the younger one is more dynamic in his personality. And whilst he didn't have that language development, he certainly had more, shall we say, drive to get himself noticed. And he still has that now. Excuse me, guys, just my throat. He still has that drive now. Whereas the older one he's so used to just sitting back and not thinking he has anything valuable to say. And this has caused so many issues in school because he is so quiet and will just do whatever somebody asks him to do in the best way it can be done, that he gets missed. And this is one of the reasons why we've had to take him out, because the deep level of need he has often been missed. And it's been a real eye opener for me to home educate and work out where those gaps are. Slightly horrifying and quite scary to have to work out how I'm going to help him with that language development at this late stage of the game, being that he's nearly 15. How am I going to fill in those gaps from that early neglect that have occurred, from when he's young to where he is now? So what happens with the baby is, no, I'm not trying to teach you to suck eggs, but basically what happens is, as soon as they're born, they're going to make all these brain developments. They're going to learn what words are. They're going to start understanding how the world works. So you might have heard the scenario that as a baby is developing, everything they see with four legs and fur and ears is a dog. But obviously, there are lots of other things that have got four legs and hair and ears. That could be a cat. That could be many things. But to them, they haven't built up all those associations yet to tell them that actually that something that's different about a dog is it barks or it does something else. So they're going to build that up though. And a child that hasn't been able to do that has all these words, concepts. And this is what I found when I was looking with my son this morning. So I'm going to tell you what I was doing with him this morning to help him with this sort of early language development. All of those words that they've had, okay, so say it is a dog, okay, that's a very simple scenario. They haven't built up all the connections and all the descriptive words around the word dog because nobody has stimulated them and given them all those words around the word dog. So he's missing all of these connections, super missing all of these connections. So since I've been home educating him, which is only 3 weeks now, okay, so it's early days, I have realised that, yeah, I can get him to do certain maths, I can get him to do certain literacy, but he's missing all of these basic language concepts from that early neglect. And it's the type of thing that when you have an older child, because they're pushed on quickly through the education system and the curriculum, and they have to kind of keep up with their peers, even if they're at the lower end of the spectrum of sort of understanding, they can't be having that input, which is really what they missed when they were 1, 2 years old. They're not going to get that input as teens. They're not going to get that input as an 8-year-old. And this is the problem because there's all of these gaps that have not been addressed. So this morning, let me give you an example. Sorry, it's hot in this jumper, but I'm not taking my jumper off because I'm not. Okay, I'm not going to do that. So yeah, this morning I said to him, right, let's do some language. Let's chat about things, okay? So the eyes roll, and this is the thing about home educating. If you're thinking of it, just remember you're the only one who's going to get them to do it. Nobody else is. So think carefully about it if you're thinking of doing it. But anyway, I said, right, let's choose a word, any word. So we chose the word bread. Right, bread. Because what I've noticed about him is when he's communicating with someone, he thinks they already know the way he's thinking, and his associations with words are different than most of the people's. So, hi. Oh, right, I'm just going to read this. I'm just going to break off from the video a bit. Hi, thank you for all your videos during my wife and our adopting quest. We are now at the stage of doing our first bump. Wow, that's really exciting. Am I calling you Yorkie? Am I calling you Yorkie? Well, thank you for joining me anyway. I'm talking about early neglect. If you haven't copped onto that, I'm just describing what happened this morning with my son. But I really appreciate you being here, and you're more than welcome to my videos. What I can share, I can share. I can't put everything right, and I'm sure you'll find that when you adopt, there'll be lots of things that you thought you knew, but you're going to be learning from scratch. But it's very exciting if you've got to that stage. So congratulations. So yeah, I don't know what's going on with my hair today. Anyway, so we basically have this word bread. And bearing in mind my son is nearly 15, almost 15, right? Now, the first thing that you and I would say about bread, I hope you and I would say about bread, is it's food and we eat it. But not him. He came up with all sorts of different angles. I think the first thing he said is disgusting because he doesn't like it. So again, he couldn't see that if you were describing bread to someone else and you just said it's disgusting, that doesn't describe bread. Okay, so we went on quite a while like this. Now, to be fair to him, we've not done this sort of exercise before, and this is definitely a sort of exercise a speech and language therapist would do with word association. And because I've got communication disorders experience as well, it's definitely the sort of thing you would do. But he didn't know what I was doing, obviously. So it was a bit of a struggle with bread, but then he brought up dried pasta and we went with that. And then we brought up a cup of coffee and he got the idea. But it was so clear to me that the basics, I mean, one thing he never did was describe colour. that didn't come into it. He didn't describe. He found it really just difficult to describe texture in any way. So at one point, I got him to bring up a slice of bread, which kind of broke the ice a bit, and then he stopped. He stopped getting arsey with me then. Sorry, did I say that word? Yeah, he stopped getting arsey with me then because he thought this was funny. And I said, right, okay, feel that bread. Because at some point he'd said, it's soft before we'd got the bread up. And I said, well, soft is a good word, but soft is just the opposite to hard. And I said, so many things could be soft. So many things could be soft. I said, I think we need to go a little bit more, in depth. So once he'd felt the bread, he could give me the word spongy. I was like, yay, yes, we're getting there. So you can see from this early neglect, he hasn't had those brain development synapses forming, with starting off with a concept. And you and I have got lots of things that flood into our minds. If I say to you cup of coffee, you'll have all sorts of associations with a cup of coffee, whether you love it or hate it. But he doesn't have that. And a lot of our adopted children, foster children, don't have that receptive, descriptive, or expressive language. And if they do, lots of them are affected by their early childhood trauma or their early neglect. So whilst I'm talking about neglect, I'm also talking about early childhood trauma as playing a part in this, because in some of my videos I've explained to you, in some of them there are probably more than 300 on there. So Yorkie, if you're not sick of me yet, I'm sure you will be, and one day you'll be like, I think we know what we're doing with our child or children now. We don't need to listen to Nairi anymore. We've had enough. And by then, I might not be grey. All of my hair might have fallen out as well. So that will be fun to watch, won't it? But I forgot where I was going with this now. When we're talking about our children and what they've gone through, adopted and foster children often have early language delay. But when you say to somebody about, so one of my sons has severe speech and language delay, but they're expecting him not to be able to speak. But he can speak. And if you've ever come across autistic children or children with other childhood conditions, sometimes they can speak at a really high level. But when you go below the surface, you might realize they haven't a clue what they're talking about. And actually, some of the words they're using, they've just repeated it from adults. And I'm going to say that would be my other son. He's not autistic, but he will repeat a lot of what he hears from films. So I have had to correct him many times that in the UK, we don't call lifts elevators, really. And we don't call sweets candy, but he's hearing it, so he just repeats it. I'm sure that's the same for other children. Don't get me wrong, it's not all about adoption and fostering and childhood trauma, but this is what I'm trying to say to you, is that you have to dig really deep. And when I dig really deep with my son, I realise that I have a few months now with him before perhaps we get him into some sort of other facility, college, somewhere for additional needs. I've got time to work with him. And even if I can't replace those brain connections and language and synapses, then one thing I can do is get him to understand that he is not necessarily thinking like someone else is, because this is where the communication so rapidly falls down, because he thinks people are. And if I can just get across to him that actually he needs to double check what someone's saying, what someone's thinking, and be confident enough to do that. But there lies another problem, really. So the confidence to do that. If they've gone through neglect or abuse or both, the confidence to ask an adult what an adult means if they perceive that adult to be more important than them. And the saddest thing about my older son is I think he thinks all of the world's more important to him, and that's heartbreaking, and we still work on that now. So it's getting them to be confident enough to come back to you and ask the questions that they maybe struggle to ask. So I'm trying to think. Yeah, this is another example. I'm not running my boys down. I love them, but if I give you examples, you'll know that I'm speaking from experience. So both of my boys have gone down to see my mum at the moment. My mum plies them with all sorts of rubbish like grandparents do. It's really sweet, to be honest, and I don't mind at all. So I took my eldest son out today. He's worked really hard all week. We took the dog out, we were having a meal together, and I said, "Are you going down to grandma's later?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "She'll probably give me cheddars." Right? Now, you might not be in the UK, so you might not know what cheddars are. Cheddars are round, biscuity type crisps that are quite dry, but you either love them or hate them, right? And he said, "And I hate cheddars." Now, my son has been going down to my mum's for forever, and I think forever she has been giving them cheddars, and not once has he said, "I don't like them." And this is my mum. And bearing in mind that I do understand why he's nervous around some people, but I don't think he's nervous around my mum. But he obviously doesn't think his opinion of what is only a snack, is not even a meal, matters. And he doesn't think that because he was severely neglected and abused as a child. So he doesn't think the world really owes him anything. I mean, he can sort of be very down at times, but he obviously doesn't think that it's worth mentioning, which I said, if you just say you don't like them, she'll give you something else. And he looked at me as if saying, "Well, yeah, probably." So there we go. So the things to think about early neglect are, excuse me, I'm going to cough, not just the language development. I think we've thrashed that one out. But Yorkie iron is interesting. There are other things, obviously. When I say obviously, there are other things that are directly linked with a child that's had neglect, particularly if it's systematic, it's long term, and one of those things is issues around food. All right, issues around food. Now, there's lots of different issues around food. So the obvious issue around food is if they've not had enough, then they might overeat. Excuse me, this is all this talking. They may well overeat. So if you go to a get together, a party, and the food is out on show, you have to be really careful because they might binge eat and then they can make themselves poorly. And the other thing is, which is much less common, is undereating. But anyway, whichever way you look at this, issues around food, because when they were younger, they didn't know where it was going to come from. Maybe when it came, it wasn't very nice or it wasn't enough. Maybe they were used to getting their own food. Maybe they were used to looking after siblings. But there could be potentially lots of issues around food with early neglect. The other thing that we've noticed is, I think because our sons have both had speech issues, then the other thing that we've noticed is almost a, how can I put it, sort of not liking certain textures in food. So my older son more than my younger one, but certain textures, especially if it's a bit cleggy, a bit dry, sort of mashed potato, stuff like that, they've really struggled with, especially the older one. And when they were younger, particularly, it was certain textures they struggled with. Chewing, they seem to struggle with quite a lot. And I think that's all connected with speech development. So that's other things around food as well. The other thing around food, or anything, not just food, but anything else, is hoarding. So I don't mean hoarding in the sense of just cluttering up for the sake of it. When I say hoarding, I mean keeping things close to you that you're afraid you're going to lose it. So you may or may not have heard the story about when we first had our boys in as foster children. Then they had their shoes on and they wouldn't take their shoes off to get into bed. So they went to bed with their shoes on. And the following day, they carried their shoes around with them and they carried everything they owned around with them and they put stuff in their pockets. And to a certain extent, we still get a little bit of that now. I mean, I don't mean exactly the same as that. They're teenagers, but the younger one particularly he has to see a lot of things out. And he sort of collects things. Again, nothing unusual about that. It's not, there's plenty of adults that collect things. You're only going to watch the auction house or something and see how many people collect things. So again, not being negative, but he will have to sort of have a lot of things out to see them, and he will squirrel things away. And it's a case of just having lots of things, and there'll often be things in pockets. When they were younger, especially, not so much now, they would just carry loads and loads of things around in their pockets. And you'd be like, what have you got all this in here for? Well, I just want to have this with me. And it's because they just don't want to let go of it. They don't want to lose it. And that's, again, not having enough of anything when they were younger and having very little to their name. And now it's like, oh, I can have lots of these types of things. I can have lots of food. I can have lots of everything. And you find that hoarding can be a big issue when it comes to neglect. What else can we think of? Let me have a look. We found that when it comes to body, okay, so not having had the stimulation, possibly the warmth, possibly the food, that we have found a lot of sensory issues with our boys. Now, whether that's just down to neglect, whether that's down to the childhood trauma, whether it's down to all of it, I don't know. I don't think I can really sort of speak expertly on this, but there's a lot of sensory issues. Now, they've ended up not being anything to do with autism with the younger one, and the younger one's been checked, and everything that he has is down to early childhood trauma. It's not down to autism. However, sensory issues are sort of all over the place in a way. So smells, touches, they can have an aversion to touching certain things, being in certain situations that require them to have sensory overload or sensory underload. So sensory, and the older one, more so him than the younger one, but not having any barometer heat wise. So he can get super hot and he's sat there in his sweatshirt. I feel like I'm talking about the older one more today, but on my videos I talk about the younger one's anger a lot, so I suppose it's all fair, isn't it? Yeah, so you can sit there with a sweatshirt on and he could be so hot, and I'll say, "You're sweating," and he'd say, "But I don't feel hot." Or it can be that we're going to go out in the freezing cold, and I say, "You need to put your coat on." He said, "Well, I'm not going to be cold." I said, "But we're inside now." He said, "No, I'm not going to be cold." So those types of things as well. Um, this was really bizarre the other day. My husband bought a really spicy curry. I think that was a mistake on his part. He didn't mean to buy it so spicy. I like really spicy food. I can take it quite hot, but he bought this really spicy curry to the point that I could barely eat it, and I will eat more spicy than any of them. My oldest son sat there and ate it. He said, "I don't think it's that spicy." I said, "You're joking, aren't you? This is one of the spiciest curries I've ever eaten." He said, "No, I don't. I'm not finding it that spicy." So again, sensory, sensory. So, how are you all doing anyway? If you want to just pop anything in the chat, you will let me know if you're just interested in adoption, you've adopted. We've already had one comment there in the chat. If you're fostering, or if you're just interested in the subject that I'm talking about, which is absolutely fine because this live stream has gone on for non-subscribers as well as subscribers. So don't worry if you're just interested. That's good, because we talk about some really interesting things on my channel, I would say. So I forgot where I was going to go with this now, and now I can't think. So somebody please put a comment in the chat. Let me have a swig of tea because I can't think of where I was going now with this. Yes, I can. Okay. Yeah, pop, introduce yourself in the chat. You might be somebody who's followed the channel for a long time. You might be new to it. You might have just come across me in your feed. That's fine. I'll wait and see if anybody pops anything in, but then I've just thought about the next thing I want to talk about around neglect. Nobody saying anything? Okay. So this one is the one that I found the most difficult around neglect, and that is personal care and lack of thereof. When children are younger, it might be apparent a little bit. So what I noticed, they were quite late. Well, they were very late for toilet training. They weren't much bothered about what they were wearing or anything like that really. They loved having new clothes, so I think that was definitely a testament to the fact that they hadn't had very much. They loved having new stuff. I could just go and get them a set of socks and they would be absolutely overjoyed, and that was the beautiful thing about when I first had them. You could buy them anything, even clothing. They wouldn't look for special gifts. They would be super happy about it and super happy about any different types of foods coming into the house. But the hygiene side of it, or lack thereof, is really difficult when they get older. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because, excuse me, is because, no, this, I just need to, if you do adopt, excuse me, if you adopt, you will find that, I'm just going to have to go out and cough and come back. Sorry, I don't want to cough really loudly on screen. If you do adopt or foster, you will find that, I would say, if a child has been neglected, that they are very slow to understand that they need to look after themselves. No, I'm going to have to cough again. Sorry. Oh dear, I've lost one of you already. I'm back. This is the sort of things that I can edit out of my videos, okay? Because, yeah, I've got a throat problem. But anyway, I am back. The one person that stuck with me, thank you very much. Yes, they do really, really struggle with understanding the need to look after themselves. And that's because they've not had that given to them from a very young age. And when they are older, it becomes a massive problem. Now, I am still at the stage with teens, and you might say, well, yeah, but that, teens can be like that. Hi. Hello, Lauren. Well, Lauren, you might be the only one still here. I don't know. Lauren, I always edit this out because I have a bit of a throat thing going on. I'm getting old, Lauren. So, there's lots of things going on. Yes, the neglect side of it does create problems with self-care. Massive, massive for my boys. People say to me, well, they're boys, Nairi. And, that's what happens with teenagers. Yeah, I get that. That to a certain extent, it does. But I'm going to say there's a whole different level, I'm going to say that if my husband and I went around, they would literally do none of it at all. Okay. So because they don't feel it, and that's the thing, they don't feel that sort of sense of I'm dirty now, or my hair is getting greasy now, or I need to change my clothes because they smell. And I think most children by their age, even if they didn't want to do it, they would actually do it. They would actually, start taking responsibility to a certain extent when you think they're nearly 14 and 15. All the way through, we've had this. All the way through, we've struggled to help them to keep clean and to want to bother to have that level of self-care. And I do think it is because of their early neglect that we have that problem with them. And so it's a case of just facilitating and helping them to do whatever they can around that, and helping them to understand why we're asking them to do things. So fortunately, we went to the dentist recently. Yay, what a wonderful experience that was. We got them to the dentist. This is all fresh off the press, so this would have gone into a video, but it's here now. We took them, and it was a lovely lady dentist, and both of them have sensory issues about brushing their teeth. This is another thing that I feel comes out of neglect. Sensory and teeth. Teeth can be a massive phobia. So they both seem to struggle to want that brush in their mouths. It's I can't explain it to you. They don't like the sensation. So she said to the younger one, what is it you don't like? And he said the minty flavour, which my husband was like, wow, I wasn't expecting that. I said, no, because he likes mint. So, but he said that he didn't like the taste and the flavour. And I think with my other son, it's just the feeling, and he's got a few kind of crooked teeth. So it's the feeling of the brush going out the back of his mouth. So fortunately, because we were with the dentist, we were able to get the dentist to explain why it's important. So I was able to say to my son, she's saying there's staining at the back of your teeth. So if you don't brush the back of your teeth, you're going to end up with fillings. Now, unfortunately, the dentist was using words like cavities. My sons are going to think that's some sort of cave somewhere. They're not going to think it's anything to do with fillings and staining. I have to interpret everything for them, especially the older one. So I had to go through all of the stuff. He's got to go off to the orthodontist. Let's go back to the language problem here. And they're going to send him to have a look at these crooked teeth and what have you, because he's going to need treatment and a normal dentist can't do it. So I tried to explain it wouldn't necessarily having a tooth taken out. It's going to need maybe straightening, maybe not. There's some metal that will go in your mouth to help straighten. He worries about it all the rest of the day and all that night and all part of the next day. He's in a terrible mood the next day. And I said, what is wrong with you? He said, I'm worried about having metal put in my mouth. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, metal going straight through into my gum. I said, what? Well, I said, I don't know any dentist that's going to do that to you. And that's not what I meant. And then I explained the whole, what a brace looks like, what I mean by metal and the wire, and how to, it takes lots of time. And this is all because of that neglect and not having the language there, that the world seems a scary place to him, to both of them sometimes. So anyway, we were on self-care. Let me know in the chat if there's anything you want me to cover in this subject, and I certainly will. Okay, so if you want me to talk about anything that you think might be around neglect or anything else, question, pop it in a chat, because I might be I'm not running out of ideas. I could talk all day, but you let me know if there's anything around early childhood development and neglect, language, anything like that, or anything else you want to ask around adoption or fostering. I will do my best to answer your question in the chat. Okay, don't be shy. Don't be shy. Please don't be shy. But obviously don't divulge anything you don't want to. But if it's a question that you think somebody else might benefit from. So let's have a look at this. So normally, when you look at neglect, you think physically neglected, and that is true. Both of my sons came in for that, but they came in for emotional abuse as well, and there were other reasons for that. But part of neglect is sometimes that adult not bothering with that child. So it's like it doesn't matter if they're there; they're just there. And both my sons dealt with that really differently. So the younger one dealt with it. He was only 2 when they left home, but he dealt with it by sort of clinging hold of the mum and making lots of noise and making himself sort of known that he was there. Whereas the older son sort of blended into the background and tried not to be noticed, not to be seen. And honestly, that's exactly the characters that we have now. But it isn't just a physical thing, is it? It is an emotional thing, because over the years, if you don't really matter, you don't matter to the people that you should matter, then you just form a world in your mind that um, adults can't give you what you need, and they can't be trusted, and you don't matter to adults, and basically adults don't matter to you. And going back to this sort of thing around my son and the cheddars with my my mum's not bothering to tell her that he actually doesn't like cheddars and he doesn't want to eat them. It's like, well, does it matter? He's probably thinking, do I matter to her enough to tell her I don't like those cheddars? Does she matter to me enough as to whether I'm going to form more of a bond with her to be able to have that conversation with her? And I think this tips more into the emotional side of what happened to my boys, perhaps, but it does also smack of neglect. And the more I get so confused between ambivalent and avoidant, but I'm going to go down avoidant because that's what they were labelled. There's no such thing really as labelling attachment. Attachment is attachment issues. Attachment issues are attachment issues. You can try and label it, but the avoidant side of it plays out now. If they've got a problem, they don't come to us still, unless I work out there's a problem and then I ask the questions in a very simple way to get the answers, which means that I feel like I'm MI6 sometimes, MI5, the interrogation. I've trained myself to be like that, and I drive myself bonkers trying to find out what's going on sometimes. But it's almost like when they had their assessments when they were younger, and I wish I still had them. I don't have them because we had them done as I'm trying to put these on my head straight. We had them done Okay, it's the opposite way round on the camera. No, that's awful. We had them done when the boys were really young, but they were our foster children. So we didn't keep those assessments, unfortunately. So this professional took the boys into another room, which that didn't go well to start with. She took them into another room and she gave them lots of scenarios where there was family members and adults there, and there was a scenario. So the scenario that she said to me was the one that I remember, because bearing in mind we've had the boys now for, what were they, 2 and 3, and they're now 14 and 15, about 12 years. The scenario that she gave to me was, I gave them a story of where the family were going out in the car, and the car keys got lost, and the dog did this, and blah 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 blah. She said I went through this whole spiel with them. I mean, the boys were quite young at the time, but I'm still going to say we've got the same blueprint now as what we had then. And they never mentioned once that they'd go and find an adult to help them. Not once. And if my boys can work things out between them, they will. And I find that the most disturbing, because it still shows that what they learnt about adults when they were younger is still there, that adults are not necessarily going to be their source of help. Now, before I get too negative about this, and those of you who are about to adopt thinking, woe is me, why am I doing this? I just want you to know, and anybody watching this back on a replay, our boys have severe neglect, severe abuse, high end, okay? So it's not going to be the same for everybody. And I don't want you to think I'm being super negative, because you may not find some of these things happen for you at all. But the reason why I run the channel is for those of you who do come across problems and you can't find the information anywhere else. You're too afraid to go to social workers because you don't want to be judged. You're struggling maybe, and you're thinking, what the heck is going on? You might be able to look back over my videos and think, I do remember that woman, whoever she was, mentioning that that had happened to her. So I know that is not just me, because adoption and fostering and bringing up children who suffer from childhood trauma can be very isolating. It can be very difficult to get schools on board. If you've got good family and friends, they'll be your greatest source of inspiration, but it can be hard work. It can be really difficult. So I don't want you to think that all of these things that have happened to me with my boys are going to happen to you, because they won't. Because we knew when we took them on that even looking at them and their physical condition and realizing their development was already majorly affected, that we were going to come across, lots and lots of issues. So yeah, I'm just trying to be a bit more positive there. So I'm going to just pause, take a breath. I don't need to cough anymore, so that's good, isn't it? So I still don't have any questions in the chat yet. So let me know if you have any, and I will think about where I'm going to spin off to next. I don't mean spin off out the room, because we're all right now. Think about what I want to say next. I might talk about how I feel I'm doing with the home educating. I know I've touched on that, but if anybody, maybe let me know if you think that could be an area you want me to explore, because I did think about home educating for a long time and I didn't really want to do it, but we're doing it, and we've swapped around more from my husband doing it to me. So I'll talk about how I feel that's going. I'll also talk about who we've got on board to help us, if you want me to. Okay, but if you don't, I won't. I'll start talking about something else connected to probably neglect. But I'm just going to take a breather, because I'm afraid I'm getting a little bit fed up with my own voice. Just take a little breather. If you can think of anything you want to ask, then do. Okay. I think you're all shy today. Yeah. Right, okay. Well, we won't talk about home educating yet then, unless somebody pops it in the comments. But what I will say is, all right, so you end up with a child that's got high level of neglect or neglect. How are you going to help them? I'm not going to say that I haven't covered this in other videos. I definitely have. So please go back and check out some of the earlier playlists where I might even have a whole playlist on neglect. I mean, I look a lot younger there because I was dyeing my hair at that point, but hey ho. So what can you do with children that have suffered from this? Well, it's going to be no surprise to you that predictability and provision of their needs, basic needs, is going to be 100% where you have to go with this, even if it's boring, even if it's to the point you're like, oh, can we not, not bother to have dinner at that time tonight, or can we just skip something? Or you just have to be, especially when they're younger, it has to be really rigid, that they know that when they get up in the morning, that there's going to be a certain thing, not the same thing for breakfast, but breakfast is going to be available, that they've got, they know what they're going to put on, what they're going to wear, and they know what's going to happen during the day. Because any chance, really, especially with food, that they aren't going to get fed is not going to go well for you. So say you want to go out for the day and you're quite happy as adults to wing it a little bit. So you're going to go out, and whereas at home you might have had lunch by 1, you're going to go out and you don't mind if it runs over till 2 o'clock because you're adults and you're going to get fed, right? I might not like that. But anyway, you're going to get fed. You can't do that with especially little ones that have been neglected, because they will panic. If they don't know where that food's coming from and they start to feel that hunger, that is going to trigger them, and you're not going to have a good day out, because all they're going to be able to think about is whether they're going to get fed. And I'll give you an example. It again, keep getting to the wrong side of my hair. Again, it's an example that I have given before, is when the boys were younger. I don't know how much younger, because we've been to the zoo several times with them, even as foster children. That was something that was facilitated for us. So just say they were young children then. Let's just say under the age of 7, for argument's sake. So we decide we're going to go to the zoo, and I think that we took a packed lunch on this occasion. So we took a packed lunch because we thought it was going to be easier to do that. We left from home, so about 11 o'clock. And it takes about an hour to get to the zoo from where we are. Now, our thinking was, we go to the zoo, we go and see some of the bigger animals, get that out of the way, so that, we're not traipsing along looking at, not slugs, but, the boring birds that nobody wants to see. And we get there, we think, right, we're gonna, look at some of the bigger animals. So we get there, and as soon as we get there, they start asking to have their lunch. So there's no like, well, we could wait a little while before we have a lunch, do a bit of the zoo, and then we can have some lunch. It's like, no. And you know what? They could not think of anything else other than having that lunch. And with neglected children, that is the case. They're going to be like, where is the food coming from? When is the food going to get there? And when our sons were much younger, not so much the little one, but the older one would definitely binge eat. So when we first had him, he would binge eat. He wouldn't have a turn off barometer. So it'd be like everything going down. So it's a case of making sure that they get their meals regularly, that you're trying to give them a nutritious, balanced meal, and not allowing them to go too far one way or the other. My younger son has a real trouble with sugar and having to consume a lot of sugar. Praise the Lord, they didn't have any fillings. How did that happen? He likes a lot of sugar. My older son, I can't explain. He sometimes feels full, he sometimes doesn't. But all I'm saying is, with younger children, especially in the early days, it's a case of everything regular. When it comes to self-care, you'll probably have to do a lot for them. And I don't mean because they're young, but I mean because of their situation and just not understanding and getting it. If the child's coming to you as not being cared for properly from a point of view of clean clothing, being bathed regularly, brushing teeth regularly, then they're just not going to get it. They're not going to understand why they need to do that. And the thing is about children that have been in that type of environment, it's not necessarily that what you're showing them to them is any better because they don't know what that feels like. You would think, wouldn't you, if you were going around in dirty clothes and you were just a bit cold or you hadn't had a bath in weeks or whatever, that you would feel really uncomfortable and you would want to get sorted. But a child that's just been brought up like that doesn't know that. So everything that you're going to show them is going to be so new and different and completely alien. And so it's going to be a very long road of consistency of showing them that this is what we do, but also this is why we do it. So with the boys, it's like, you need to have a shower every day. I make them shower every day because of, well, I just do. And the reason why you need to have a shower every day is because you're going to smell and therefore it's going to affect your friendships. And you need to wash your hair because it's going to get greasy and then your skin's going to be affected. So it's explaining all the time. It's not just a given with them that they will need to do those things, and it won't be with a child that you take on. So, guys, I'm just going to wait and see if anybody has anything they want to ask me in the chat. Okay, because if you don't, I will wrap it up, but I'm more than happy to stay around if you would like to ask anything. I'll just give you a few minutes because it may be that you aren't brave enough to ask. I'll just double check if there's anything I had written down. I mean, whilst I'm waiting to see if you pop any questions in the chat, I'll just give you a brief overview of the home educating, okay? To start with, we started off on what we thought would be relevant sheets and stuff for the elder child that we thought was the right level. We then came down a level massively. I went and got some new books. And then I looked at that and I looked at how he was doing that. And I thought, no, we've got to go back. And I think the stressful thing for me is I've always known those gaps are there, but because of where they are in the school system, those gaps can't be addressed. So it has been a struggle, not because I'm not willing to do that, but because I need to get that balance out with my son where I'm not asking him to do things that he can't do, but I am asking him to do things where he's actually going to learn something. Because what's the point in sitting down and doing any of those things with him if he's actually not going to get anything out of it? I think we're getting there. As I said about this language thing that I'm doing with him, I'm also looking at the basic math symbols, plus, minus, multiplication, division. I'm looking at that with him because I can see he's sometimes getting muddled with that even. I can see that when he's trying to work out a multiplication, he's not necessarily laying it out properly in a way that he can do it. And if he can't do those things and he's still weak on his tables, which I believe he probably is, then I've got to put all that in place. So I'm just being brave enough to do what I think is right for him. The other thing that's happened, which is such a blessing, is that the CAMS team, so if you're in the UK, CAMS is children, I think it's children adolescent mental health team, which we've needed to get on board because of the way that his mental health is. We've managed to get that on board, but we've also managed to get him within the disability team for CAMS. So they are going to be able to assist and help us with the levels he's at and then what he can have now and what he can have later. So that's really exciting for us because we feel like we've got the support and we can't do this alone and that he's going to need a lot of support as an adult. So that's amazing that we have that. And we're so excited to see what they can help us provide for him. They've already suggested that there's going to be, what about how to maintain relationship with siblings in a healthy way? Sorry, right, I'll read this out properly. Okay, so we've got a question here. What about how to maintain relationships with siblings in a healthy way? They come from a similar background but live in a different household and are not in foster care. Any feedback about that? So are you saying that, I'm not sure if it would be a barrier to progress and or promotes, okay. So are we saying that the siblings are living, they come from some, okay. So are we saying that their siblings are in two different houses and you're wondering whether to maintain a relationship when they're under two different roofs? I just want to clarify what you're asking. So, whether you're thinking you continue to try to build a relationship between siblings that will be living elsewhere. Right, okay, yeah. Right. Hmm. I'm going to be really careful how I answer this, okay? Because I've got my own perspective with our own boys. Our own boys came from such a background that it hasn't been healthy for them to maintain those sibling relationships. However, we're not against it for later when they're older if they want to touch base. We're not against it now, but when they were younger, so when we first had them, it was never recommended um, by the social workers or anyone to keep that contact going. And so when they were eventually adopted and it went to court, it wasn't recommended either. So we didn't, I'm not saying we didn't have a choice. We've got a choice. We could get hold of them now if we really wanted to. But the boys were younger than their siblings and they never wanted to keep that contact. So they weren't asking for it either. Okay. So that's our situation. So your situation, I'm going to say what I would be looking at is, first of all, you may be asked to do it. And if you're asked to do it and it's a recommendation of the court, you still wouldn't have to do it as an adopter, but if it's a recommendation of the court, then that's kind of what their expectation would be. But if you do have contact with siblings, you need to really watch really carefully about what happens when they're together, because people get so angry about this, but sibling contact is not always a good thing. It depends what those children have gone through in that home. And if it's going to trigger them massively, it's not necessarily healthy at some points in their life. I mean, later it might be, or there might be sometimes when they can handle it, but you would need to watch about what happens when they're together. Because when our boys were foster children, we did have a couple of contacts before things went through court, and it was quite obvious to us that this really wasn't a good idea. It was super obvious. And I'm sure when they get older, they will want to seek out their siblings, and that's fine. So I think it's about, so you put, I'm not sure if it to be a barrier to progress. I think you're going to know what they've come from. You might not know everything they've come from. You will also see if they're asking to see them. So if they look like they're missing them and they're asking to see them, then it's worth setting up some contacts. But based on how that goes. So another thing that happens with our boys is that the girls that were older were very dominant over them and went straight into caring for them, into a caring role. It was all very strange and it was just not great. So it depends when they're together what you see. So if you see that they interact pretty well when they're together and there's no massive safety concerns, then you could continue with it. If when you get home, you have a bit of fallout and upset and they're very unsettled for a while, that wouldn't be unusual. That wouldn't be a reason to stop it. But if they're super anxious, super agitated, and this goes on for a long, long time, then if you're going to see those siblings, say, every month, that could be a barrier to progress. So it's definitely not, really, it's a good question to ask because it's definitely not a given that it's a good idea. But at the same time, it is their siblings, it is their family, and you don't really want to lose contact with the birth family unless you have to. In our situation, we had to. So ours is more extreme. But if you don't have to lose contact with some of their birth families, it's kind of better if you don't and you do try it. But there's a lot of factors there because depending on what level of abuse and trauma they've suffered, they may be, when they're younger, they can start to think, well, am I going back then? Which it could be that they're looking to go back and they want to. I know that sounds unkind to you, but it might be like, oh, yes, oh, I'm missing my siblings, I want to go back. So that's something you'd have to discuss and deal with, but it's not necessarily a reason for not carrying on with it. Or it could be that they're scared they're going back and actually seeing their siblings is dragging them into a really dark place. And it's so difficult. It's really tricky. I mean, this is not relevant in a way, but I had a really difficult father, and it was really difficult to know whether to carry on visiting him or not. I wanted to keep contact with him because he was my father, but it had a massive effect on me emotionally in every way. So yeah, I hope that goes some way to answering your question, but it does vary so much with adopted children. I know of adopted children that keep that contact going for many, many years, and there's really no issue. Particularly if there's a big age gap. Age gap. Excuse me. If there's not that much sibling rivalry and there's a big age gap, sometimes it can go quite well. I do know of one where it's been pretty successful, to be honest. There's a big age gap, and they've met each other once every 3 months, and they enjoy seeing each other for that time. I don't think they really miss each other, but they've still got that contact there for the future. Because the problem with our situation is, if we want to make contact now, it's going to be a big ask, because we've not had that for many, many years, and it's going to be nerve-wracking for the boys and possibly them as well. And children are curious, they want to find their roots, so we're going to have to do quite a lot of groundwork if our boys actually want to meet up with siblings or grandparents, whatever. I'm pretty sure the older one will want to, but we're going to have to do a lot of work. So there is something to be said for keeping some sort of contact, but the way around that could be, if you don't think it's going great in physical contact, is to keep letters going. That's another way you can get around it. So I hope that helps your question. And if there's anybody else that wants to ask anything, please feel free. See, I can't speak now. That's what happens after talking all this time, over an hour, guys. So hopefully that answers a little bit, Lauren. But to be honest, it's a good video idea. It's a very good video idea. I might just write that down. I mean, I've answered it really, but yes. Let me just write that down in my little book. There we go. It's in there. Something to be expanded on, maybe. Good, great, brilliant. Well, I thank you for joining me. Lauren, I know you're there, and I'm sure others have been there. So I do thank you for joining me. Hope you found the live stream useful. If you're watching it back on the replay and you haven't subscribed, please do. And you can check out membership as well. There is membership where I do some videos just for members. And I will see you all on Fly Little Birds. Thank you.